This is Professor Adrian Lockewell of Archives of Humanity. Few episodes reveal the hidden weakness of greatness more clearly than the affair of the poisons. At the height of Louis the Fourteenth's authority, when France appeared to have transformed monarchy into a science of obedience, spectacle, and rank, the regime encountered an enemy it could neither parade in triumph nor fully expose without injuring itself. Not a foreign army, not a noble rebellion, not a province in open revolt. What emerged instead was an underground economy serving fear, lust, inheritance, ambition, fertility, and revenge through poison sales, fortune-telling, abortion services, love magic, clerical mediation, and other deniable transactions that flourished in the shadow of official order. The chronology matters because the scandal did not erupt from nowhere. Its most explosive phase ran from AD 1677 to AD 1682, yet the great public prelude came in AD 1676 with the execution of the Marquise de Brinvilliers. Her case struck France with unusual force because it made a private terror suddenly public. Poison had long belonged to rumor, moral warning, and aristocratic anxiety, but Brinvilliers gave it a face, a rank, and a dreadful plausibility. She was no outlaw stalking a highway and no mutineer challenging the state in the open. She was a noblewoman associated with calculated domestic murder. That distinction mattered. It suggested that destruction could pass through intimacy, through kinship, through the household itself. In political terms, it announced that violence in a refined society need not arrive with banners or drums. It could move silently through the same channels as trust. That shock unfolded within a monarchy built by design, not by accident. Louis the Fourteenth was not a decorative backdrop to these events. He was their political architect in the deepest structural sense. After the memory of the Fronde had convinced the Bourbon state that great nobles were dangerous when left autonomous, the crown worked to draw ambition inward and upward toward the person of the king. Favor became a currency. Access became a prize. Ceremony became a discipline. Prestige was measured by nearness, and nearness itself had to be managed, observed, and performed. Versailles was not merely a palace. It was a machine for organizing dependence. In such a world, affection could alter policy, marriage could shift power, inheritance could rescue or ruin a lineage, and reputation could function almost like capital. That is why this affair was far more than a criminal scandal. Every age has murder, fraud, and illicit commerce. What made this episode dangerous was that the clandestine world seemed to imitate the logic of the court. The monarchy monopolized advancement, legitimacy, and recognition. The underground market offered shortcuts where the official system imposed delay, exclusion, or humiliation. Where the court distributed favor selectively, clandestine specialists promised influence for a fee. Where public morality imposed limits, private brokers offered remedies. Where dynastic strategy and sexual competition created intolerable pressure, hidden services appeared to promise control over fate itself. The poison network, in other words, was not an alien growth feeding on an otherwise healthy order. It was a parasitic mirror of that order. As the scandal widened, the range of accusations made the problem impossible to dismiss as isolated depravity. Investigators encountered testimony about poison procurement, abortifacients, fortune-telling, aphrodisiacs, love charms, and alleged sacrilegious rites later described as black masses. Those claims must be handled with care, especially in an environment shaped by fear, coercion, bargaining, and rumor. Yet even the uncertainty is revealing. Servants appeared in the records. So did urban intermediaries, petitioners, and members of the aristocracy. This was not simply a pathology of the poor or the credulous. It was a cross-sectional crisis reaching from the margins of Paris to the households of the powerful. The state responded with arrests, executions, interrogations, secret examinations, and exceptional judicial machinery. Just as significant was what it refused to reveal plainly. Certain truths could be prosecuted. Others became too dangerous to handle in the light. That danger defines the real meaning of the affair. Popular memory often treats it as a lurid eruption of superstition in an age otherwise celebrated for classical order and royal grandeur. That version is comforting because it confines the scandal to the realm of moral monstrosity. The deeper reality is harder to face. This was a crisis of information and legitimacy. Testimony multiplied faster than certainty. Confession could be sincere, strategic, or extorted. Accusation moved through networks of envy and self-preservation. The closer inquiry came to elite society, the more the crown faced a brutal dilemma. Full exposure might vindicate justice, but it could also corrode the image of moral command on which absolutism depended. Poison, above all, terrified a ceremonial regime because it mocked hierarchy itself. A monarchy could command armies, regulate precedents, and surround the sovereign with layers of etiquette, yet still remain vulnerable to a vial, a powder, a physician, a mistress, a servant, or a pliable cleric. Poison was social inversion in concentrated form. It allowed the weak to strike upward, the hidden to bypass the guarded, the intimate to defeat the armored. In an age that worshipped visible rank, poison belonged to the politics of invisibility. The paradox, then, is not that the strongest monarchy in Europe somehow suffered an outbreak of invisible crime. The paradox is that its very method of organizing power helped create a market for invisible solutions. A court that centralized reward also centralized desperation. A system that tied survival to patronage increased the value of deniable intermediaries. A society obsessed with appearances generated immense demand for concealment. The more the official world claimed authority over honor, marriage, inheritance, fertility, and reputation, the more profitable it became for clandestine specialists to sell alternatives beneath the surface. Beneath the polished image of the grand siècle stood a more unstable reality. A kingdom glittering at the center and straining at the edges, a court that made ambition theatrical, and a capital vast enough to monetize every private fear. That is where the invisible siege began, not in fantasy, but in the social logic of late 17th century France itself. What made the scandal possible was not simply vice, but structure. France in the 1670s glittered because it had been tightened. Beneath the spectacle stood a political memory Louis the Fourteenth never forgot. The Fronde had taught him, while still young, that a kingdom could be humiliated from within. Princes could posture as defenders of liberty, magistrates could obstruct, Paris could become volatile, and the crown could be forced into bargaining where obedience should have been automatic. That lesson did not produce mere resentment. It produced a governing method. Versailles was built not only to display majesty, but to reorganize power. It functioned as a machine of favor. The nobility were not destroyed. They were domesticated. Great families were drawn into a world where access to the king replaced older habits of semi-independent grandeur. Offices, pensions, military commands, apartments, ceremonial distinctions, invitations, even the right to stand nearer at the correct moment of ritual life, all became instruments in a disciplined economy of patronage. A place at court was never just vanity. It could secure marriage alliances, sustain debts, preserve influence at law, and protect an entire lineage from decline. In that system, rank was theatrical, but the consequences were material. This is what made court society so unstable beneath its elegance. Favor was concentrated in one man, and therefore anxiety was concentrated with it. A glance, a summons, a visible sign of warmth from the king could restore a household's fortunes. A season of indifference could expose weakness that rivals had been waiting to exploit. Old sword nobility and newer robe elites alike were trapped inside the same logic. Louis did not end aristocratic competition. He enclosed it, supervised it, and made it dependent on his presence. The result was obedience, but also permanent tension. A courtier excluded from influence was not merely disappointed. He might be watching his family's prospects, his creditors, his children's marriages, and his political future begin to slide at once. That pressure deepened under war. The Dutch War expanded French prestige, but glory carried invoices. Campaigns demanded money, administration, and unceasing extraction. Taxes bit harder. Offices circulated in a monetized system. Families already straining to maintain status faced the cost of keeping themselves visible in a court culture that punished retreat. Magnificence was not optional decoration in such a monarchy. It was political signaling. Splendor operated like credit. To look diminished was to invite predation. To vanish from court was to risk irrelevance. So beneath the polished image of absolutism lay a harsher arithmetic. Overstretched fortunes, brittle alliances, and households living one reversal away from humiliation. Versailles concentrated ambition, but Paris remained the metropolis of solutions. The palace decided who mattered. The capital supplied what could not be requested openly. Paris held apothecaries, surgeons, midwives, confessors, notaries, moneylenders, scribes, fortune-tellers, and those shadowy intermediaries who moved between respectable and illicit jurisdictions with unnerving fluency. This world should not be divided too neatly into modern boxes. Medical practice, devotional practice, magical thinking, household remedy, and clandestine vice often overlapped. A client might seek help for infertility, desire, a failing pregnancy, a straying lover, a violent husband, or a disputed inheritance, and the chain of referrals could pass through circles that mixed piety, commerce, gossip, and fraud. Paris did not merely sell substances. It sold possibilities. That overlap mattered because 17th century medicine itself was uncertain. Toxicology was primitive. Symptoms were ambiguous. Many deaths looked ordinary because ordinary life already involved extraordinary risk. Childbirth could kill. Infants died in shocking numbers. Fevers, wasting illnesses, intestinal disorders, and sudden collapses belonged to the normal landscape of existence. In such a world, the line between remedy and weapon was dangerously thin. Powders, metals, herbs, opiates, purgatives, cosmetics, perfumes, and household compounds circulated through daily life without the firm boundaries that later medicine would try to impose. One preparation might be offered as a restorative, another as an aid to beauty, another as an aphrodisiac, another as an abortifacient, and under darker conditions the same traffic in substances could shade into poisoning. The market for invisible harm flourished because the market for uncertain healing already existed. This made deniability one of the most valuable commodities in the kingdom. Open violence belonged to a cruder political world. The society of Louis the Fourteenth was obsessed with appearance, and appearance required plausible innocence. Elites did not always seek murder in the blunt sense. Often they sought an outcome that could be absorbed into the fog of ordinary misfortune. An inconvenient death that resembled illness. A pregnancy that disappeared without scandal. An affection restored without public degradation. A rival weakened without a duel. A spouse removed from calculation without a courtroom battle that exposed the family itself. What mattered was not only result, but concealment. Family life sharpened every one of these incentives. Inheritance law gave private fear a legal and financial edge. Marriage was not simply companionship, but strategy, property, alliance, and succession. An heir could shift the destiny of several branches of a family. A childless union could provoke quiet desperation. Extramarital affairs were not merely moral lapses. They threatened lineage, patronage, legitimacy, and the distribution of wealth. An unwanted pregnancy could become catastrophe. A surviving spouse might obstruct collateral relatives waiting for an estate. An aging favorite at court might see replacement not as heartbreak, but as political extinction. Under those conditions, desperate acts did not appear to their participants as theatrical villainy. They appeared as controlled interventions in a world where hesitation could mean ruin. This is why the poison market was not an alien growth beneath a healthy social order. It was one of the services generated by that order's internal pressures. The more the monarchy centralized advancement, honor, and survival around proximity to the crown, the more demand grew for hidden specialists who could alter the odds without public scandal. Rumor became infrastructure. A whispered name could travel from salon to chapel, from servant to mistress, from confessor to midwife, from lawyer's clerk to desperate noblewoman. Knowledge of who could procure a powder, recommend a discreet operator, interpret a horoscope, arrange a clerical contact, or manage a dangerous domestic complication became a form of power in its own right. Paris, in that sense, was the shadow bureaucracy of Versailles. And once that shadow bureaucracy existed, profit followed fear with perfect logic. Certain brokers learned that they did not need to command armies or hold office to influence the fate of great houses. They only needed to stand at the intersection of secrecy, desire, and plausible denial. That is the world in which the entrepreneurs of the affair would thrive. Paris produced its own entrepreneurs of desperation. In the spaces between law, medicine, devotion, and scandal, a set of operators learned how to turn private fear into revenue. The most notorious among them was Catherine de Chaise, remembered as La Voisin. Her historical importance does not rest on the fantasy of a solitary poison empress ruling a secret kingdom from the shadows. It rests on something more revealing. She functioned as a broker, a coordinator, a commercial node in a wider urban web where information, substances, introductions, and emotional promises could all be bought in pieces. That distinction matters. A conspiracy suggests a rigid hierarchy, a single plan, a chain of command. What existed in Paris looked far more like a service economy. Clients arrived with different problems and different thresholds of risk. Some wanted to know the future. Some wanted a lover restored, a pregnancy ended, a rival weakened, a patron persuaded, an inheritance advanced, a marriage rescued, or a household obstacle quietly removed. Each of those desires could be routed through the same underground because 17th-century categories were unstable. A powder might be presented as a beauty aid, a medicine, an aphrodisiac, a fertility remedy, an abortifacient, or something more lethal. In a world of uncertain chemistry and dangerous treatment, the border between cure and poison was not only medically thin, it was commercially useful. That was the genius of the trade. It rarely marketed murder directly. It marketed possibility. It sold the hope that fate could still be negotiated. La Voisin's world offered horoscopes, fortune-telling, palmistry, love powders, private consultations, and access to intermediaries who seemed to know how hidden things were done. A frightened woman could come seeking relief from pregnancy. A discarded lover could seek to recover influence. A servant could appear on behalf of a mistress who preferred not to be named. A family pressed by succession anxiety could ask vague questions whose meaning did not need to be stated aloud. The transaction was protected by ambiguity. No respectable client needed to say plainly that a husband should die or a rival should be destroyed. It was enough to ask whether someone might decline, whether affections could be rekindled, whether obstacles could disappear, whether fortune could be nudged. What was being purchased, as often as any physical substance, was deniability. The market thrived because it fragmented responsibility. One encounter produced a horoscope, another brought a powder, a third arranged an introduction. Payment could be split, instructions could remain imprecise, goods could pass through servants or acquaintances. If the desired result never came, blame could fall on bad luck, improper use, the weakness of the preparation, or the interference of some rival operator. If it did come, reputation spread through rumor rather than contract. This was crime designed to dissolve into ordinary urban exchange. Other figures moved through the same overlapping circuits. Marie Bosse appears in the record as another dealer in poisons and confidences, less famous than La Voisin, but important precisely because she proves the trade was crowded rather than singular. Adam Lesage belonged to that valuable class of go-betweens whose power came from seeming connected to hidden capacities. Abbé Gibourg would later become infamous through allegations tied to sacrilegious rites. Yet even here caution is essential. Proven poison transactions, alleged ritual practices, and rumor-driven accusations do not carry equal evidentiary weight. Some claims emerged under interrogation, fear, bargaining, and the brutal incentives created by criminal prosecution. The record contains real traffic in dangerous substances. It also contains theater, extortion, self-invention, and testimony sharpened by survival. Still, the presence of pliable or renegade clerics reveals something crucial. They supplied more than ritual. They supplied legitimacy. In a society ordered by sacrament and hierarchy, even illicit acts gained force when wrapped in borrowed sanctity. A client did not merely buy a service. That client bought the feeling that invisible powers, sacred or forbidden, had been enlisted on a private behalf. Fraud becomes more persuasive when it wears the vestments of authority. La Voisin's real talent lay in managing this emotional and social choreography. She understood how to receive anxiety without frightening it away, how to move someone from consultation to dependency, how to transform raw panic into stages of purchase. First came interpretation. Why had affection cooled? Why had fortune turned? Why had the body failed? Why had a rival advanced? Then came remedy, then escalation. Once a client accepted that unseen forces governed the problem, more costly and riskier interventions became easier to sell. In that sense, the business dealt not only in substances but in explanations. It translated chaos into a sequence of acts that made helpless people feel active again. That helps explain the breadth of the clientele. Servants entered the market because they stood near food, linen, medicine cabinets, letters, and the intimate habits of their employers. Provincial petitioners entered because Paris was the metropolis where impossible arrangements could be attempted. Bourgeois households entered because honor, marriage, and inheritance were fragile enough to justify secret remedies. Members of the nobility entered for the most revealing reason of all. Rank did not calm fear. It refined it. At higher levels of society, love could become patronage, pregnancy could become scandal, childbirth could become dynastic risk, and favor could determine the survival of an entire family strategy. A mistress who feared losing affection was not merely afraid of heartbreak. She was afraid of political extinction. A wife facing displacement was not merely jealous. She was defending children, property, alliances, and future security. This is why women like La Voisin should not be reduced to caricatures of exotic wickedness. They were economic actors operating inside severe constraints, exploiting opportunities created by a society that made official solutions narrow and unofficial ones profitable. Their commerce fed on secrecy, but secrecy was not their invention. It was the natural language of a world in which appearance governed status and status governed survival. The network remained diffuse because diffusion was its protection. No single mastermind needed to command every exchange. One operator read fortunes, another sold compounds, another carried messages, another provided clerical cover, introductions, or rumor. Together they formed a marketplace in which hope, fear, and harm could circulate without ever fully declaring themselves. And that was the true menace taking shape beneath the surface of Paris. Not a single hidden cabal, but a resilient economy of deniable acts, woven through households, parishes, and patronage itself, difficult to map, difficult to prove, and increasingly difficult for the authorities to dismiss as mere urban vice. What disturbed the French monarchy was not merely that poison killed. It was that poison abolished the visible grammar of power. Rebellion could be met in the open. A duel had codes. War had banners, fortresses, and frontiers. Poison moved through none of those channels. It entered by intimacy. It passed through kitchens, bedchambers, confessionals, private consultations, small packets, whispered recommendations. In a society built on rank that made it uniquely subversive, a servant could strike a master. A discarded lover could reach where petition and force could not. A disappointed heir, a creditor, a wife trapped in a dynastic marriage, a mistress afraid of being replaced, all could suddenly imagine access to a hidden instrument that ignored title, lineage, and ceremony. Poison was social inversion in liquid form. This was the problem confronted by Nicolas de la Reynie, appointed Lieutenant General of Police in Paris in AD 1667. The office sounds technical, almost dry, but its significance was immense. La Reynie embodied a new ambition of the Bourbon state, to make the capital knowable. He was not simply hunting thieves in alleyways or dispersing disorder in markets. He was helping build an apparatus of observation suited to a monarchy that no longer wanted to react blindly to crises after they erupted. Streets, lighting, sanitation, guilds, beggars, vice, public rumor, suspicious mobility, illicit trade, household disorder, prison intelligence, clerical irregularity, neighborhood reputation, all of it belonged to the same field of governance. In that sense, La Reynie was not just a policeman. He was a manager of information. The crown had reasons to value such a man. The memory of the Fronde still haunted the political class. Those upheavals had taught Louis the Fourteenth a brutal lesson in youth. Authority could be humiliated not only by foreign enemies, but by domestic fracture, urban unrest, noble intrigue, and unstable loyalties inside the kingdom itself. Paris was therefore never treated as a neutral backdrop. It was a place where resentment could gather behind respectable facades, where clients and patrons formed hidden chains of dependence, where rumor could outrun edict, and where the monarchy might again discover that danger wore familiar faces. Hidden networks mattered because hidden networks had once brought the state close to embarrassment and paralysis. The Marquise de Brinvilliers gave that anxiety a new object. Her execution in AD 1676 satisfied public appetite for scandal, but for the state, the crucial revelation was not theatrical wickedness. It was the demonstration that lethal intent could travel through domestic and familial channels that conventional power barely saw. The case touched inheritance, trust, kinship, and the murky border between medicine and murder. It suggested that the old categories of order were inadequate. If a noble household could be penetrated through invisible means, then the question ceased to be whether one woman had committed extraordinary crimes. The question became whether an underground market existed for those who wished to bend love, fertility, reputation, and succession without leaving the fingerprints of open violence. From AD 1677 through AD 1679, scattered arrests and examinations slowly turned suspicion into method. La Reynie did not possess an all-seeing machine. He worked through fragments. Informants were cultivated, but informants were seldom pure instruments of truth. Some wanted money, some wanted pardon, some wanted revenge. Some hoped to redirect attention away from themselves by sacrificing an accomplice or inventing a superior. Prison examinations yielded names, but prison was a furnace of fear where memory, bargaining, fantasy, and calculation could merge. One deposition generated another. A midwife named a fortune teller. The fortune teller referred investigators toward a broker. The broker connected to a renegade cleric or to a domestic servant in a titled house. A servant recognized a visitor, a payment, a package, a consultation, a sudden illness. Each statement extended the chain. Each chain enlarged the fog. That difficulty was not accidental. The clandestine economy was structured for deniability. The person seeking a solution often did not meet the person supplying the dangerous substance. A love powder might mask an abortifacient. A fertility consultation might conceal an inheritance struggle. A cosmetic, a devotional object, or a medicinal preparation could sit on the threshold between remedy and crime. Payments might pass as gifts, alms, or fees for spiritual advice. What investigators confronted was not a single conspiracy marching under one banner, but a dispersed service economy whose operators specialized in ambiguity. The same social world that created the demand also supplied the camouflage. La Reynie's achievement was not certainty. It was pattern recognition under conditions of permanent uncertainty. He and his agents learned to compare testimonies, confront witnesses with contradictions, isolate recurring names, weigh independent references, and distinguish the solitary liar from the repeated point of convergence. This was painstaking work and dangerous work because repetition itself began to reveal scale. Certain figures reappeared across separate testimonies involving suspicious deaths, failed pregnancies, efforts to regain affection, attempts to remove rivals, and appeals for supernatural assistance. What had looked like vice on the margins began to resemble infrastructure. The monarchy was no longer facing scattered acts of depravity. It was confronting circulation. That changed everything. A murder could be prosecuted as an individual crime. A market in invisible violence implied clientele, intermediaries, regular exchange, and social reach extending upward into households that mattered politically. The inquiry ceased to be ordinary policing and became something closer to intelligence warfare. Relationships mattered as much as acts. Who introduced whom? Who visited in secret? Who paid in cash? Who feared public exposure? Who had reason to seek a deniable solution? The investigation was mapping channels of private desperation inside a regime that claimed to monopolize order. By AD 1678 and into the early months of AD 1679, the net tightened, but success brought its own peril. Every verified connection opened another corridor. Every witness who spoke credibly threatened to touch a more sensitive household. Clerical scandal risked moral scandal. Domestic scandal risked aristocratic scandal. Aristocratic scandal risked political embarrassment for the crown itself. Paris had become a battlefield of information, and the enemy had no uniform, no fortress, and no official chain of command. It had brokers, secrets, clients, and the shelter of respectability. The next arrest would turn that hidden war into a full state crisis. By March 1679, the investigation ceased to be a matter of scattered suspicion and became a direct problem of state. The arrest of Catherine de Chaise, known as La Voisin, marked that break. Until then, poison had haunted the monarchy as a pattern half seen through rumor, scandal, and private fear. Her capture changed the scale of the affair because she was not merely a suspect in one crime. She was a broker at the center of many needs: love, fertility, inheritance, revenge, concealment, and influence. In her person, the police had seized something far more dangerous than a poisoner. They had seized a point of connection. And once the state holds the broker, every whispered recommendation, every unexplained purchase, every anxious visit, every sudden death begins to rearrange itself into a network. That was the true shock. La Voisin exposed the fact that respectable society had never been cleanly separated from the underworld it publicly despised. The same capital that sustained lawyers, confessors, apothecaries, and royal clients also sustained fortune-tellers, abortion providers, poison sellers, and clerical intermediaries willing to traffic in forbidden remedies. The boundaries were porous because the needs were real. A noble household facing disgrace, a mistress losing favor, a wife fearing abandonment, a family trapped by inheritance calculations. All could be driven toward deniable services. Once La Voisin entered custody, earlier depositions stopped looking like isolated fantasies. They became fragments of a larger system. The investigation was no longer asking whether crime had occurred. It was asking how far the market for clandestine solutions reached into the social order itself. The Crown answered in April 1679 by creating the Chamber Ardente. The name carried the tone of emergency, and its function was unmistakable. This was a special tribunal, established to hear the extraordinary accusations surrounding poisoning and related offenses that ordinary channels of justice seemed ill-equipped to manage. It was meant to concentrate the state's response, to gather testimony, compare statements, interrogate suspects, and impose judgment with a force proportionate to the danger. Poison was not like duel, theft, or riot. It moved in secret, crossed rank, and often left uncertainty where proof should have been. The Chamber Ardente existed because the monarchy recognized that conventional procedure was too slow and too narrow for a crime that spread through private rooms and hidden dependencies. Yet the creation of the tribunal also revealed a weakness at the heart of royal power. Extraordinary courts are founded to restore order, but they also advertise that normal institutions cannot contain the threat. The Chamber Ardente was designed to compress chaos into legal form. Instead, it gave chaos an official archive. Every interrogation generated new leads, and every lead opened another chamber of suspicion. A servant named a mistress named a fortune-teller named a priest. A priest was linked to another household. Marie Bosse accused clients and rivals. Adam Lesage emerged in the widening chain. The Abbé Guibourg appeared in testimony as a clerical figure willing to provide illicit services to those who believed ordinary religion, ordinary medicine, and ordinary patients had failed them. The police did not move from clear evidence outward. They moved from one compromised statement to the next, testing fragments, measuring contradictions, and discovering that each attempt to clarify the truth pulled them deeper into aristocratic households and clandestine devotional circles. That multiplication of names was the real explosion. It threatened far more than a docket of criminal cases. In the France of Louis the Fourteenth, reputation was a political asset, marriage a strategic alliance, and proximity to favor a form of power. Each deposition, therefore, carried consequences beyond guilt or innocence. It could stain a lineage, damage a patronage network, destabilize a household, or expose motives that polite society needed to keep hidden. Jealousy, sterility, resentment, sexual dependence, panic at declining favor. The tribunal was uncovering not only alleged acts, but the private desperation beneath public grandeur. That is why the affair became a governance crisis. The state was no longer judging criminals at the margins. It was accumulating testimony that could implicate the very people on whom the social order depended. La Voisin remained central to this expanding storm until her execution in February 1680. Burned at the stake, she left behind the most politically dangerous kind of record. One severe enough to justify punishment, yet incomplete enough to preserve uncertainty. She denied some accusations, resisted others, and never delivered the comprehensive confession magistrates might have wanted. That mattered. A full confession would have offered clarity, or at least the appearance of clarity. Her mixture of silence, partial denial, and fragmentation did the opposite. It left judges, rivals, and later generations with a space that could be filled by further testimony, speculation, and fear. In cases of hidden crime, silence does not end an investigation. It enlarges it. It was in that enlarging space that the most explosive allegations entered the record. Reports of black masses and sacrilegious rites began to circulate with increasing force, binding poison to a far darker language of spiritual profanation. These claims must be handled with caution. They emerged in conditions shaped by imprisonment, bargaining, fear, and the constant pressure to provide investigators with names and details of value. Some witnesses had every reason to magnify their knowledge. Some may have embroidered rumor into accusation. Later retellings would seize especially on the most lurid charges, including stories of infant sacrifice, but the evidentiary ground remains uncertain and deeply contested. What mattered in the moment was not simply whether every detail could be proven. It was that such allegations were being attached to elite clients and entered into judicial process. They fused ambition, sex, religion, and murder into a single political toxin. By the opening months of 1680, the Chamber Ardente had become something more unsettling than a tribunal for poison cases. It was a mechanism for discovering how deeply the upper ranks of French society had relied on secret specialists to manipulate fate. And with each new deposition, the inquiry moved closer to names whose exposure would wound more than individual reputations. It was approaching the zone where criminal truth and royal legitimacy could no longer be safely separated. The testimonies were no longer circling nameless poisoners, obscure midwives, or brokers from the Paris underground. They were moving toward the royal household itself, toward the one sphere an absolute monarchy could never examine as if it were merely another criminal district. Once Madame de Montespan entered the field of suspicion, the affair ceased to be only a judicial crisis. It became a problem of dynastic legitimacy. Françoise Athénise de Roquecourt, Marquise de Montespan, had been far more than a celebrated mistress. For years, she was the dominant female presence in the political theater of Louis the Fourteenth's court, and in a patronage monarchy that position carried consequences far beyond intimacy. Royal affection distributed offices, pensions, marriages, protections, and futures. The favorite was not simply loved. She became a channel through which ambition flowed. Families attached themselves to her rise. Clients depended on her nearness. Enemies waited for the moment that nearness weakened. At Versailles, where favor had been converted into a system of rule, the king's private attachments could rearrange the public order. That is why the decline of Montespan's influence mattered so much. It was not only emotional displacement, it was political evaporation. The late 1670s changed the balance around Louis. Madame de Maintenon rose in seriousness and proximity. The king's religious conscience deepened. Long scandal, which had once glittered, began to look heavy. Court society, always sensitive to changes in atmosphere, detected the shift. And when a royal favorite began to fade, the danger was immediate. Clients drifted, rivals grew bold, old resentments revived. In such a system, losing affection could mean losing protection, leverage, and historical relevance all at once. Under those conditions, the accusations attached to Montespan possessed enormous political force, even before the question of proof was settled. Witnesses and depositions linked her name to figures already entangled in the poison investigations. Allegations circulated that she had sought love magic, aphrodisiacs, and ritual services intended to recover or preserve the king's attachment. In some testimonies, the names of notorious intermediaries and renegade clerics appeared beside hers, including the Abbé Guibourg. More sensational claims followed, some involving sacrilegious rites that later generations would remember with lurid fascination. Yet this is the point at which caution becomes more important than spectacle. Allegation, proof, and political plausibility were not the same thing. Allegation was abundant because the machinery of interrogation kept producing names. Proof, in the strict judicial sense, was far weaker. Many statements came from imprisoned witnesses whose motives were compromised by fear, vengeance, bargaining, or the hope that useful testimony might purchase survival. Some repeated rumors already circulating in a climate of terror. Some may have embroidered truth with invention. Some may have fused fragments of reality into narratives shaped by what investigators seemed ready to hear. Montespan's possible motive was intelligible enough. Her actual conduct remained far harder to establish with certainty. That distinction mattered enormously, but politically it did not solve the problem. It intensified it. For Louis the Fourteenth, the dilemma was mercilessly clear. If the inquiry moved forward without restraint, it risked placing the crown itself in the dock of public opinion. Montespan was tied to the king not merely by memory but by acknowledged children, by years of visibility, and by the court culture that had flourished around her. A full public reckoning would not simply stain one woman. It could stain the king's judgment, the moral prestige of Versailles, and the carefully cultivated image of order that underwrote absolutist authority. Foreign powers would watch. Moral critics would seize the scandal. Pamphleteers would inherit a gift. The monarchy would appear to harbor, not merely punish, hidden corruption. Yet the alternative carried its own cost. To halt the inquiry, or to narrow it when it approached dangerous names, meant admitting in practice that justice had limits set by rank and political utility. The monarchy would preserve its image only by compromising the transparency it claimed to embody. This was the cruel logic of concentrated power. The closer truth came to the symbolic center of the regime, the more dangerous truth itself became. The regime sought not merely to punish crime but to manage revelation. That calculation shaped what followed. There was no sweeping public trial of Montespan that fully tested every accusation before the realm. There was instead a politics of containment. Certain testimonies were handled with extreme caution. Certain lines of inquiry narrowed as they climbed the social hierarchy. Certain names became less prosecutable not because suspicion vanished, but because exposure had become strategically intolerable. The issue was no longer simply what could be known. It was what could be allowed to become public knowledge. Here the crown reached for instruments older and colder than open justice. Lettre de cachet, administrative imprisonment, and prolonged confinement allowed politically dangerous suspects to be neutralized without the uncontrollable theater of public trial. A suspect could be removed from circulation, buried in a prison, a convent, or remote custody, and effectively erased from ordinary discourse. Such measures solved the immediate problem of scandal, but they created a deeper one for the moral authority of the state. They announced, without ever saying so plainly, that some truths would be governed outside the visible law. What emerged was a hierarchy of knowledge. Police officials knew more than judges could safely expose. Judges knew more than the public would ever be told. The king knew enough to fear the consequences of full disclosure. Posterity inherited fragments suspended between record and silence. The affair had entered its most revealing stage, because the monarchy's greatest vulnerability was no longer poison alone. It was the discovery that an investigation could become more dangerous than the crime it pursued, and that preserving the throne might require the deliberate mutilation of the truth. By AD 1680, the inquiry was no longer expanding in the old way. It was being contained. That change did not come because the hidden world of poison, illicit remedies, fortune-telling, and ritual brokerage had finally been mapped with confidence. It came because the investigation had crossed a line at which further truth yielded diminishing political advantage and growing political danger. By the time the special proceedings effectively wound down in AD 1682, the central question had been quietly transformed. The crown had begun by asking who had bought death, who had sold hope, and who had trafficked in forbidden services. It ended by asking a harsher question: how much public truth could the monarchy endure without staining the very authority it claimed to defend? That distinction mattered more than any single sentence pronounced by the Chamber Ardente. The tribunal had been created to handle extraordinary accusations, yet extraordinary courts produce a danger of their own. They do not simply deliver punishment. They accumulate testimony, preserve suspicion, and generate archives of contamination. One interrogation led to another name. One name opened another household. Another household exposed servants, lovers, confessors, creditors, and patrons. In a regime built on rank, access, and reputation, that process did not remain confined to the criminal underworld. It crept upward through the social structure itself. The state was manufacturing politically combustible knowledge faster than it could safely display it. So the field of visible justice narrowed. Those without protection remained exposed to spectacle. Those closer to influence increasingly encountered discretion, delay, or silence. The broad outcome was severe, but never clean. Dozens were executed across the affair. Others were sent to the galleys, banished, confined, or imprisoned for long periods. Many more were questioned, denounced, cross-examined, or named in fragments that never matured into a formal public sentence. This is one of the defining facts of the closure. The radius of suspicion stretched far beyond the boundary of punishment. The monarchy permitted enough visible severity to demonstrate that it still possessed the power to strike. But it refused the kind of total exposure that would have revealed how deeply the scandal had entered elite society. The result was not acquittal. It was not resolution. It was political triage. Containment became policy because open trials had begun to threaten the hierarchy they were meant to purify. Public procedure can restore confidence when guilt appears isolated, local, and removable. It can destroy confidence when guilt appears woven into the fabric of court life. That was the arithmetic of Versailles. If too many noble households were dragged into formal litigation, if too many intimate arrangements became legal evidence, if too many connections between favor and deviance were spoken aloud in the language of judgment, then the scandal would stop belonging to criminals and start belonging to the regime itself. For that reason, some suspects vanished from public view into fortresses, remote prisons, convent confinement, or indefinite detention under royal order. The lettre de cachet became a mechanism of state survival. Punish without a public drama, immobilize without a full trial, silence without granting innocence. There was a cold coherence to that decision. An absolute monarchy presents itself as the fountain of order and the final arbiter of justice. Yet in this affair it survived by admitting, in practice, that certain truths could not be entrusted to ordinary legal process. That was not simple weakness. It was a brutal adaptation to the limits of absolutism itself. Louis the XIV's government learned that scandal had to be administered as carefully as crime. Some lines of inquiry were allowed to cool. Some records remained politically dangerous. Some names were left suspended in that twilight zone between rumor and memory, neither cleared nor fully exposed. The state was no longer only prosecuting offenses. It was managing revelation. The consequences did not vanish with the tribunal's decline. They settled into administration. The police and judicial apparatus of the later reign became more attentive to poisoning, illicit divination, clandestine medicine, abortion networks, and the informal brokers who moved between households, parishes, markets, and courtly circles. The great lesson of the affair was that invisible crime did not travel through exotic corridors. It moved through ordinary urban channels. Rented rooms, whispered referrals, domestic labor, confessional trust, commercial exchange, and the constant traffic between Paris and Versailles. That recognition sharpened official habits. Surveillance became more systematic. Interrogation became more coordinated. Authorities learned to think less in terms of isolated offenders and more in terms of connected milieus, overlapping services, and chains of introduction. The monarchy emerged from the crisis with a stronger appetite for information and a more disciplined method for gathering it. But another lesson moved in the opposite direction. The affair taught the regime that knowledge and publicity were not the same thing. A stronger center did not necessarily mean a more transparent state. In early modern monarchy, strength often meant the ability to decide what could remain visible and what had to disappear behind administrative discretion. Police could know more than courts declared. Ministers could act where judges could not safely conclude. Royal power could preserve order precisely by limiting what order was allowed to admit about itself. In that sense, the affair strengthened the crown operationally while compromising it morally. It improved the machinery of surveillance, widened the intelligence horizon of the state, and confirmed the value of coordinated policing. Yet it also proved that the image of perfect royal clarity rested, in part, upon carefully maintained darkness. By AD 1682, then, the monarchy had achieved closure only in the narrowest institutional sense. The tribunal had receded, the arrests had slowed, the public phase had been curtailed, but the deeper uncertainties were not solved. They were buried under procedure, confinement, and selective forgetting. On paper, the state had survived the scandal. In reality, it had survived by accepting an uncomfortable dependence on silence. Beneath the ceremonial brilliance of Versailles remained a damaged space that no decree could fully seal. Names half revealed, guilt unevenly distributed, and justice bent by reason of state. What remained after the executions and imprisonments was not merely a memory of poisoners, fortune-tellers, and compromised clerics. It was a governing precedent. When truth begins to threaten legitimacy, power must choose whether to expose, to punish, or to conceal. The choice made here did not end the matter. It defined the terms on which the final judgment must be made. What remained after the arrests, the sealed testimonies, the vanished names, and the carefully managed silence was not merely a solved crime, but a judgment on an entire political design. The affair of the poisons was never just a scandal of deviance at the glittering edge of Louis the Fourteenth's France. It was a revelation from the center of the system itself. A monarchy that claimed to organize rank, discipline desire, and choreograph society had also created a hidden economy for everything it could not honestly satisfy. Influence, fertility, revenge, secrecy, love, fear, and the desperate hope that fate might still be bent in private when power could not be reached in public. That is the final verdict. Absolutism did not merely discover a criminal underworld beneath its polished floors. It generated the conditions in which that underworld could thrive. Versailles concentrated favor with astonishing skill. It made access a form of wealth, reputation a form of protection, and intimacy with power a matter of survival. But whenever a regime binds advancement so tightly to proximity, whenever inheritance, marriage, legitimacy, and office become inseparable from appearances, a market inevitably forms around the manipulation of appearances. Some seek to win legally, others seek to win invisibly, and between those two worlds there appears a class of intermediaries ready to sell what official life cannot safely provide. Not only poison, but permission. Not only substances, but promises. That is why this affair belongs to the history of human nature as much as to the history of crime. The people drawn into these systems rarely understand themselves as monsters. They understand themselves as cornered, deprived, displaced, or threatened with decline. Ambition speaks the language of necessity. Jealousy dresses itself as justice. Panic hides behind decorum. Once status anxiety becomes existential, moral boundaries do not always collapse in a dramatic instant. More often, they are negotiated quietly, transaction by transaction, excuse by excuse, until the unthinkable becomes merely deniable. The hand that would recoil from open violence may still finance discreet violence. The conscience that trembles before scandal may tolerate corruption, so long as honor survives on the surface. In courts of great splendor, hypocrisy is not a decorative flaw. It becomes a survival mechanism. The political lesson is harsher still. Every centralized state longs for perfect knowledge. It wants the reports, the witnesses, the confessions, the records, the magistrates, the final authoritative narrative. Yet there comes a threshold in many such regimes when truth ceases to strengthen power and begins to endanger it. That was the deepest crisis concealed inside this affair. Once the logic of inquiry moved too close to the intimate architecture of monarchy, justice could no longer proceed as pure exposure. At that point, secrecy ceased to be a failure of the system and became one of its instruments. Selective silence was not the opposite of power. It was power defending its own image from the consequences of full disclosure. And so the affair reveals one of history's most enduring patterns. Wherever official systems promise order but cannot answer private desperation, clandestine markets will arise. They change their language with each century. They may speak in the accents of medicine, finance, influence, law, spirituality, romance, or confidential expertise. They may look respectable. They may even appear indispensable. But the underlying bargain remains strikingly old. When institutions cannot deliver certainty, hidden operators sell the illusion of certainty instead. Civilization does not eliminate this impulse. It refines it, professionalizes it, and often conceals it beneath more elegant names. That is why the affair of the poisons still matters far beyond 17th century France. Its deepest warning is not that elites can become decadent. History has never lacked evidence for that. Its warning is that systems built on hierarchy and fear often manufacture the very shadows they later condemn. The gravest threats to political legitimacy do not always arrive from the frontier, the barricade, or the battlefield. Sometimes they emerge from the private chambers of a ruling order that has made desire too dangerous to declare openly and failure too costly to endure honestly. There, in the space between public myth and private need, hidden economies become inevitable. The cost was therefore larger than the executions, larger than the imprisonments, larger than the names half erased from the record. The cost was moral and epistemic at once. A monarchy celebrated for magnificence discovered that it could not tolerate unlimited truth. A court devoted to ceremony discovered that ceremony depended on selective blindness. A state that became stronger in surveillance emerged less pure in principle. That combination has appeared many times across history. Administrative triumph joined to moral compromise. Control expanded precisely where innocence had already been lost. One severe question remains after the tribunal falls silent. When a society makes rank the gatekeeper of security, and when appearances become the currency of existence, does corruption begin with wicked individuals alone, or with a structure that makes hidden desperation profitable? Leave the answer in one word in the comments. Structure or choice. Continue with the video on the end screen to stay inside the larger chain of power, secrecy, and historical consequence. Subscribe for long-form historical inquiries that do not stop at what happened, but press into why systems break, why elites panic, and why the past keeps exposing the private machinery behind public glory. And the judgment, after all the testimony and all the silence, remains this. The monarchy defeated the poison network in court, yet the deeper poison was structural, the commodification of fate in a society built on hierarchy and fear.